Awesome. Thanks for that intro. I'm in very good company, and Megan and Tara are soon to be my besties as I take on this new role at ClickUp. They don't know it, but they will be. um, yeah. So as Miles said, like we kind of wrote this guide because I think when the recession almost hit, everyone was like, "Ooh, don't be that company where like, and that you don't invest in marketing, you don't invest in growth because investing in marketing during a downturn actually contributes to future growth. And there's all this research out there that shows that. And this is what happened in the last recession. And all of that stuff was like, I mean, I was inundated with it, and I'm connected with a lot of growth and marketing people. So I guess it kind of makes sense. And what everybody was like saying is like, how do you actually do that? Because as we know, a lot of our budgets are um, further scrutinized, if not cut. And in some cases, our teams have been downsized or there's been a reduction in workforce and so on and so forth. So everything just starts to, coincide at the same time. And you're just like, how do I make sense of this? So we thought, why don't we try to like talk to some of the best people in the world who've like done this before, have figured this out, have a point of view on this, look at some of the companies who have grown in these turbulent times and put together a guide for our audience. And so that's what this guide is. It's definitely worth a read. It's an easy skim. There's a lot of good actionable stuff and quotes in here. If you're trying to make a point, like say to your boss, like you can like copy paste some stuff in there. So take a look at that guide. But yeah, one I'll just start off with like maybe not necessarily like a hot take, but just before we jump into the nuts and bolts of this stuff, I think a lot of us, perhaps on this call, are people that work at maybe smaller companies, like maybe startups, maybe scale ups. And I think, you know, there's this sort of like 1-2 punch that startups have faced. Even if you raised like money, like a lot, like a good round in 2021 or 22, you're still not necessarily out of the turbulent waters, because while your raise was timely and you have cash in the bank, you're probably growing slower than projected, and maybe your investors are all over you. And so you're trying to figure out, hey, how do I pivot? How do I add products? Which is a great way to think about it. How do I reach new markets? Absolutely, you should always be thinking about that, right? But that's actually a very taxing on your teams, because it takes like a lot of brain energy, a lot of research, etc. So that's very taxing, and sometimes takes you out of that machine building and machine operating that you actually need for your daily activities to keep your business afloat and your current machine working. And so sometimes it can serve as a bit of a distraction to your marketing and growth teams, sometimes even your product teams. And like founders and CEOs don't even know it. Like they think like they're doing all the right things, which they are, but they don't know it. So I'll just kick this off by saying that, to future-proof that your business, you might want to actually think about, how do I keep like all like the lights on, like the stuff that we're doing and we are working on and that is actually working, and then how do we do all this other pivoting stuff, and like maybe even create like two separate factions or workforces or work streams to think through that. So that's just like a cautionary tale, because I've kind of like talked to a lot of people, and lots of people have mentioned like, wow, like we started doing this, but then this went to shit, so I could say that on this call. Okay, yeah. So I think, the guide will kind of walk you through some of this stuff. How do you build like a great organization, which I kind of gave you a preview on. How do you assess all your metrics? How do you do planning? How do you consider your go-to-market motions? How do you make like bets or smart bets, not to use necessarily a gambling analogy all the time, but just, if you think there's only so much dollars and time and effort that we have. And so how do you place those bets around? And then what is your experimentation style and velocity and cadence, which Tara and Megan, of course, will weigh in on.
Mm-hmm.
Before we jump into more stuff, I just saw this like fun analogy that someone called Hannah Larson said on LinkedIn. She was like, oh, back in the day, everyone was like, we want to be a unicorn, but like, she was like, be a camel, which is like way better. It's sustainable growth. It's managing your costs. and keeping your cash flow high and your profitability high, and just being like cash flow positive essentially. And so it's not sexy anymore to be a unicorn, because that was like the growth at all costs way. Now this is like the more sustainable way, which is a good reminder that maybe this is the way that we should always be, and not necessarily be out there spending a dollar to make a dollar. So if your companies don't already track this sort of LTV CAC ratio, or just like your payback period, which is like how long does it take for you to pay back that dollar. Let's say you win a customer that's worth $100 to you. How long does it take for you to win that $100 back? If you don't track that closely, it would be good to start that now, because you definitely want to be more of a camel long term and play the long term game there. Yeah, and then just more on the guide, like bunch of different brands have all these amazing strategies. Like I said, we looked at companies, of course, like Jasper, Bitly, but also Figma, Masterclass, ServiceNow, Grammarly. These are companies that I personally admire, and they've done some like really cool stuff in the space. Everything from a product lens, but also from a marketing and go to market lens. Like Figma in particular, I find super compelling, because they actually, first of all, their big bet from a product perspective was, let's build this like design tool essentially, but make it browser based, which is like never heard of, right? Like Adobe is like all about like the apps, and like there's all these like different apps and tools out there, but they made this like very shareable browser based tool. So that alone was a big bet. And then they use this like community groundswell to kind of spread word. And like one person started using it inside a company, that spread across the team, and then that spread across the company. And so they've really nailed what I would call like the community-led land motion. And then they've really nailed sort of like, how do you expand inside the company? And even non-designers use Figma. Like when I was at Superside, we were all using Figma, not necessarily as intimately as our design team, but we were definitely all looking at stuff, commenting on stuff, moving stuff around. So they're like an interesting case study. Masterclass is an interesting case study. So the guide has like a bunch of these like cool things that these companies have done. And last, I will just leave you with this layer cake analogy, which is, if you're struggling with, hey, there's so many parts of like this marketing beast or this growth beast, and like, where do I focus? Like, there's all these layers, and hopefully, if you're a VP of marketing or a VP of growth, you can traverse like the altitudes on all of this stuff, of course, but hopefully you have team members and consultants and freelancers and other people in the business that can help you think through some of these things. And it's just helpful. It's a helpful graphic to make sure that you're like thinking about all of those pieces, because it is like a cake, and all of this needs to work in unison. Okay, and I think yeah, Superside team, let's dive in to the goodies. Cool. So I think the first thing is like, maybe we'll just go around the table quickly. What are some bets that Megan, you have made, and Tara, you've made, that have actually paid off? Like, any great examples come to mind, recent or on past years?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm in a very developing space. The field of AI is it's ballooning, it's changing shape all the time. Innovations are coming all the time. And so everything is bets right now. And one of the big ones that we made in the last year was really betting on a particular audience. So a little backstory: when Jasper was just getting started. So we started in 2021, a couple of years ago. Immediate product market fit, like sold like gangbusters. I mean, and the reason why it sold so well in the first couple of years is two reasons. Number one, it was a very visceral pain point that everybody had, and it solved it really beautifully. And then secondly, the TAM was huge. I mean, everybody writes. Doesn't matter if you're a marketer or an executive or an engineer, everybody writes. And so the first 2 years of Jasper's life was all about we sell to everybody. Literally students, freelancers, sales reps, everyone. And then in November of last year, ChatGPT came out. And after that, just an explosion of tools came out. And we realized pretty quickly that we needed to get focused on an audience that was where we were going to be the most differentiated, where we were going to be most inspired to solve the problems. And so that was a bet we made at the start of the year. And the thing that I'll say about betting on an audience is it sounds a lot easier than it is. It takes a lot more rewiring of your company than you think it will. You know, we started off, we did the whole all hands meeting and we were like, this is the audience. Like right now we've got a huge population that uses Jasper, but like this is the one that we want to focus on moving forward. And then like, I'll be honest, like very little changed, right? We had made the announcement, nothing changed. There's a slide I have in here if you want to pull up around like what we actually had to do to fully realize that bet. And it was not simple, right? We actually had to break it down and say, we got to change our product direction. We got to change our messaging. We got to change our channel and resource mix. We used to do a lot of advertising on Instagram and Facebook because it was kind of a consumer product. We cut that way back. The audience that we're moved to was really focusing on businesses and mid-size and enterprise businesses, and the marketing teams and the marketing use case within that. They're using different audiences or different channels to make those decisions. And then those were like, so like stage one was make the call. Stage two was change like the obvious things: messaging, channel resource mix, the product prioritization. But then even then we found that we had to like do more. And so we realized that we were still kind of like half in, half out of this change. And what we did next was, gosh, we still have a ton of people who are operating in the old ways. We need to actually change our team structure. We need to move people around. We need to dedicate resources. We need to change our entire go-to-market approach. And then the last two in here were, for a while, we were still reporting every week on the progress of the company in the same way we'd always reported on it, which was sort of like all audiences in view. We made a very intentional shift to actually stop. Like we still track and report on our full audience, but when we go to the all hands meeting, it's the audience that we've chosen that now we report on more publicly within that all hands. And that made a big difference, because it's when you're moving a ship and trying to get everybody focused, and there's still a lot happening in the outskirts, actually making that transition culturally, internally is tough. Yeah. And, we had to make some omissions. Like there are projects that I had a meeting yesterday about a project that would have brought in money, like would have brought in revenue to our business, but it would have been the wrong revenue. And so we had to make the very painful decision to leave that revenue so that it wouldn't be a distraction from this move to the audience. But it's working. I think that I can't share the specific growth numbers, but we've seen like real exciting growth in the audience that we've chosen. And that focus has really allowed us to get there.
That's an amazing story. And it's so funny because you kind of start off by like not wanting to be prescriptive, right? And think people will figure it out. And then you realize, oh no, people want the structure and the guardrails and sometimes prescriptiveness. So no, that's a huge shift. I don't take that lightly at all. And actually, like at ClickUp where I am now, we're kind of undergoing a similar thing. So yeah, that was a great slide. I'm going to steal that.
Good.
I couldn't agree more with that too. And I think what's so interesting is, especially in the market we're at right now, it's not just about acquiring, it's about acquiring the right customers and making sure that you're converting them. And so we've been on a similar, but actually very different journey, I'd say, at Bitly, because something that's so fascinating about our brand is that we service everyone. And when I say everyone, it's B2B, it's B2C, it's the SMB to the enterprise. And there are so many different use cases. And what's really, really interesting for us, I've been with the company for roughly going on about a year. And in joining, we're right now on a bit of a transformation as a product and as a brand. Most people know Bitly as a short URL or URL shortener, which is part of how we've built a lot of our virality, but we've added a whole platform. We now offer QR codes, we offer link in bio or page solutions, and we're working on taking that and repositioning. And so for us, when it gets to what are some of the big bets we've been running, I'm not going to get too much into the table stakes you talked about. Those on Rita, in that, like, yes, you have to do paid acquisition. Yes, you have to do organic and build up a lot of your overall marketing as a whole and understand the efficiency. But how do you get smart with the way that you're spending your dollars? And for us, that really started with research and coming in and knowing that our users have been changing, and a lot of the people we've been talking to, we want to start to really understand what drives them, one, to understand and recognize how our brand is showing up and how people know who we are, but then also how can we convert and make sure that we're building a really strong product-led motion as we bring in the land and expand. And so some of the research pillars that we focused on over the last year, which kind of drove to some of the bets that we're seeing a lot of success with right now, is breaking our research up into 3 different pillars to understand, one, the quantitative, which we all should be looking at when it comes to your Google Analytics or your product usage, but then coupling that with the qualitative. What are our customers or future potential customers saying? For brand, it's really about understanding our aided and unaided awareness. We're a market leader for short URLs, and that's amazing and awesome to be able to work on a brand like that. But as we're building out recognition for less known parts of our product, like QR codes, we want to really understand the efforts we're putting into brand. How are those actually translating into outcomes? And brand is a really hard thing to measure. And it's something that a lot of people will talk about when it comes to the squiggly line. And if you're looking at revenue for brand, you're probably not showcasing its right story. So how do you measure brand? And so something we look at there is our aided and unaided awareness. We got a really good insight into right now, where do we stand in parts of the products that we want to take more market share with? And then biannually, we'll go in and remeasure that and see, is that improving based on the efforts we're putting in? And so getting a really good foundation there, and also understanding what that looks like with our competitors, which is very different from the research we'll do with growth or with product marketing. For growth, it's really about our conversion rate optimization. How are we making sure the people we are bringing into our website are in fact converting, and how do we then look at the funnel to make sure we're bringing them back in? And I'll show a cool example that we've been running with our life cycle programs to actually drive better outcomes based on some of the research we're seeing on where people are dropping off and how to get them back in. So this one in particular was a program where we saw with one of our products, we had a pretty good drop-off rate in the actual trial funnel, and added 2 emails. So just 2 emails. And I think when we think about these types of programs, they can often think they're really consuming or take up a lot of time. But actually, by just adding in an abandoned cart email focused on the research that we brought in, we were able to bring back in a $25,000 in recovered ARR by just saying, come back in, purchase your plan. And so little things like that, when you think about how you can take your research and look at those big drop-off moments and then start to respond to those with experimentation and testing, really does make a monumental difference. So it's not just about acquiring, and instead also converting the right customers, as Megan was talking about. Mm-hmm. The other thing we've been working on is a lot of our jobs to be done research, which is really in partnership with product marketing and our marketing team, so that as people come in, how do we couple, we're a product-led organization, our onboarding experience, both with what we're doing in the app, as well as what we're doing with our wraparound lifecycle programs. And so a lot of the research on why people are coming in, with all the different use cases we're working into, we can start to create experiments, and we can start to create contextual flows that give people the opportunity to feel very personalized. And so that sometimes can also sound really overwhelming. And the way that we'll typically approach that is use that research to then go in and determine, okay, what flow do we work on first? When we think about onboarding and we understand our jobs to be done, what is the largest amount of customer base that's coming in that we can really deliver against. And then what's the secondary one? What's the third? So we're building them one at a time. So it's really understanding the what and why customers are coming to us for in the first place. The last thing I'll say on a big bet, I talked a little bit about brand. And so one of the bigger bets that we've been running outside of what we've worked on for acquisition is running some brand campaigns based on some of our research that we were driving on how we want to improve as a whole. And so in the first half of the year, we ran a campaign, Imagine the Possibilities. Get it? Bitlities. And what was really cool about this campaign is we did an out-of-home campaign as well as digital, and we actually focused on all of the different use cases. And so started to build customer stories into our campaigns, and all of those drove to not just a landing page, but an actual case study or a customer story. And what we saw is by driving this specific campaign where we put all of the users into the lens of how people were using and getting value out of working with the different parts of our product, leveraging retail, leveraging restaurants, leveraging all the different verticals we work with, we're seeing tremendous success. And as a result, over 177 million impressions. But more importantly, we're actually seeing higher time on page with our traffic based on creating relevant customer stories. With brand advertising, I often get a lot of, well, how do you measure the impact of things like out of home? And so what we've been able to do is set up geo-targeted locations based on the cities we're testing in to then see how that's improving the traffic within that area. And what we've seen in the test markets is that the 20% higher geo-targeted traffic is as a result of people in those actual locations are spending more time on our website. So that's a really easy way we were able to draw kind of a straight line into the impact of brand and into the impact of our overarching funnel.
And you wouldn't have been able to do this without the foundational research that you guys did.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know what? Research is so underrated, but I think, tell me if this is wrong, but it's sort of like background work and it's like uncredited work and no one sees the impact of it, because there's no output from the research in dollars. And so I feel like a lot of marketing growth teams just end up deprioritizing it. Is there a way that you were able to kind of bubble it to the surface and get buy-in that this was absolutely needed?
I think it's really important when you do customer research, especially qualitative. Everyone tends to do more quantitative than they do qualitative, but qualitative is where I could nerd out all day, every day, because there's really great ways that you can showcase how you get that research and turn it into different campaigns that convert. And so, for example, in the message that I showed with the abandoned cart, often what we do in our lifecycle programs is you take the words directly from your customers. I wouldn't say steal them. You're taking inspiration from what they're saying, but you're using their words and the patterns that you see coming up in the research to actually speak to your users in ways that will resonate. And so what I'll typically tend to do is in those examples, bring those examples back to your executive team, bring those examples back to the teams that you're working with to show, hey, here's this really cool research we did. As a result, here's a campaign we ran. And as a result of that, here's the outcome that this is driving. So it's really making sure not just are you doing the research, but how do you package that research in a way that you remind people this is the impact this is bringing. And so it's often, I will often say, being in marketing leadership, your job a lot of the time is actually communications within your internal team, within your external teams, more so than it even is marketing, depending on the stage that you're in. As much as you love doing that day to day, it's helping people understand your why and helping them understand the importance behind the big bets and coupling that with when it doesn't work, also, what did you learn? So that it's really kind of this constant evolution of how you're working on these, why you're working on them, and then what the outcome is. Yeah. And I think that's really important for research.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Megan, similar. So you guys pivoted almost the entire company on this new audience, and it must have taken a lot of research to get to that what is that audience and is this going to pay off for us, and hey, what's the backup plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked with some of it starts to bubble up naturally. You'll see it in sales calls. The whole reason we were I think this could be the audience for us is we were just seeing more traction, more adoption, better usage, clearer. When we did sort of competitive comparisons, figuring out what is it that this company over here is just not going to build for, but that is a real problem for this audience, right? So we did a lot of that. Highly recommend, certainly when you're shifting audiences, anytime you're introducing a new campaign or a new product, like you want to spend time to make sure before you make that investment, that it's going to resonate. The other place that research is really helpful, that when something Tara said really resonated with me, was when things are breaking down, we often jump to conclusions about the cause of that. So I'll give you an example. We saw a big drop off. There were people who would request a demo, right? Very high intent conversion, love a demo request. And then after you request a demo, we send you to like a Chili Piper kind of booking where you pick your time to meet with a sales rep. We were seeing a big drop off between requesting a demo and actually booking it. And so we were like, God, what is that? Like, they decided they wanted to have a demo. Why aren't they showing up, right? And initially the impulse is like, well, let's optimize that landing page. Let's move things around on that landing page. It must be, if it's a conversion problem, it must be a form issue or a landing page issue. And we had somebody on the team who was like, can we just let's just look at the people who fell off. And what we realized is a good percentage of the people who fell off were based in Europe, right? Mm-hmm. Based in a different time zone.
And there were no time zones available.
And there were no time zones that worked, right? Obvious conclusion that we would have never gotten to if we hadn't, taken the time to look. So we introduced kind of like a pre-recorded demo. We shifted some sales reps to expand our window, but we're still a small company. So we don't quite have the coverage for everything. And it made a difference, right? The numbers went up. And so I think when things are breaking, that's the other point where you need to go talk with someone that it broke for and figure out, we did that just by looking at the email addresses, but the next step would have been to try to actually reach out to a couple of these people and figure out what happened.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I've been in a similar boat. I have been doing these like what I call like win-loss calls. So every time you win a deal or you lose a deal, it's nice for someone to reach out and be like, hey, like, what's up? Third party, unbiased. I'm not the sales rep that you were dealing with. I'm from this other department. It's a type of research, right?
Yeah.
I love doing those win-loss calls because, to your point, first of all, you get amazing insight and language from these people that you could steal and use on your website and whatnot. But you start to get at like, what was it ultimately that drove them to make that purchase? And like for us, for Superside, I mean, we're competing with like a whole slew of like agencies and freelancer marketplaces and like, Bob down the street who's like your local guy who you trust, who can do design for you. So it's like we really needed to figure out like, what is it that we were winning on? Is it really our value props that we feel like are the strongest, or are there other things at play here? And the one thing that bubbled up, which actually helped shift some of our marketing programs, is just, I don't know what to call it. In my head, I call it affinity. Like all of the awareness, even this Gather and Grow program that we do, right? I mean, it is for our community so that all of us can level up. But come on, we're all marketers and growth people here. So we know ultimately it's like you're coming into our funnel, and then we'll like nurture you. And eventually when the need arises, you might become an opportunity, you might become a customer, right? But the way we were going about that, and because of the amount of value we were adding and how often we hold sessions like this and other things, that there was like this like feeling that our customers had before they became customers, that Superside's got my back. Like that affinity to our brand was just like so high. So when the need finally arose, it was just like, of course, of course. I mean, yeah, there's some table stakes. You got to check the boxes. Like it can't be too expensive and you have to have these basic features and blah, blah, blah. But it was really the affinity part that drove them to us in the first place. And like that insight was like so key, because then you take that and you go to our top of funnel content team and say, we're going to invest more in community building and more in social and more on, doing like education on YouTube, which, can be like very expensive and very time consuming, but we're going to do that because we've seen this playbook work and people like it. And now we're going to take that to other platforms. So that's an example of a bet that we took.
I love that. I've always been a huge proponent of marketing should not be about generating demand. It's about generating value. If you create great value, demand then comes. If you try to do it the other way around, people see right through that, especially in the world that we're in now. So I think that's great.
Yeah. And those things take time. Like you can't brute force it, and it's not like a engine that you can just like flip on today. So it takes time and it takes the right intent for sure.
Totally.
Yeah, that was like a good bet for Superside. Another bet for us is just this idea of ABM. I think everyone interprets it differently. Some people call it ABX because it's not necessarily just marketing. But we realized last year that, even though our ABM machine wasn't necessarily like yielding, like it wasn't the most efficient machine, that we were able to hunt the whales from it. And the beauty of hunting the whales is that your ARR, your ACV is just like so much higher. And we also found that they stay with those customers stayed with us much longer, 36 months on average. So we knew that, now once we have those whales in the door, even though it wasn't the most efficient machine, it was helpful from an LTV perspective to continue down that machine. And so we actually dumped more money, more bodies into that program. Actually, Miles, who introduced all of us, runs that program. And it's just like such a killer thing. There's like so much opportunity to improve on that, of course, like always is. But I think if you shift the lens from not just like, hey, how many dollars did this program produce, to, well, is it good dollars? Is it the good kind of revenue? Because revenue is not all equal. Not each dollar is equal. Is it a dollar I'm going to retain forever and ever? Like that, if you just shift your lens to that, sometimes like programs will like shine and you'll be like, holy shit, I need to invest more here.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big bet, but really like the lesson here is really not all revenue is equal.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. So I think Superside team, should we jump into what we're planning for the second half of the year? Yes. Yeah. What are we? What bets are we planning to make or have already made, since we're like most of us are in Q3 already? Yeah, like anything that you can share, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, now that we've got our audience, we're really getting focused on like getting much tighter coordination and alignment out of what our message is going out to that audience, and making sure that we are leveraging our own tool and other tools to get more efficiency in doing that, and then figuring out like what works, recycling, doing it again with a different slant. So one of the big things that I'm spending a lot of my time right now in is on these strategy briefs, which I know is as exciting as it sounds. But I'm pouring time into them because they build the foundation for accelerating the team beyond that. There's a slide that I put together. I think it's slide 33. You could pull it up and kind of go through a little bit about how we work as a team. So right now, we think we have always on channels. We've got, the blog, social, etc. And then we've got these push campaigns. And for the push campaigns, it all sort of begins with an idea. We pour a ton of time into the idea. We do a ton of original research. We interview. I've got a journalist on staff that goes out and interviews people. Pour that all into a brief. What you're looking at here is a collection of positioning briefs, competitive briefs, topic briefs, like on regulations in AI. That's a big one for us. And we pour them into these sort of source documents. And then if you can move forward, once we have that brief, then I can spin up an entire shell of a campaign for my team in seconds and have them be kind of on message. So on the next slide, you can kind of see what that looks like. So we can attach, this is done in Jasper. You could do this sort of without this software, but we attach it to kind of the query around like, hey, can you spin up a blog post on that? But the brief itself is devoid of format. And that means it can be repositioned in 1,000 different ways. It's just an idea in search of a home. So if you keep moving forward, you can flip through a couple. There's the brief. that fuels everything. And then that will produce what is kind of like our article or our email on that particular topic, right? So we're kind of reworking, how can we very quickly move on ideas and propagate them across all of our channels in a coordinated way that doesn't feel messy. That's our big bet for this year, is sort of like getting ideas out there more efficiently. I think another big bet that we're taking is we're watching very closely what's going to happen to Google as search changes. And if traffic from organic search starts to decline, which I think it's going to for most companies, we could talk more about that if you want, what's going to rise, right? Because it's a yin and yang, like people are still discovering companies at the same velocity, but they're doing it in a different way. And so one of the ways that we think is one of the avenues that we think are going to be more influential is networks, right? Activating an existing network of people. There have been a few big changes in the last few years that I think have accelerated this. Number one, I don't know if you all use Slack, but Slack introduced this concept of Slack Connect, where you can talk to people in other companies. So now, out of nowhere, I've got the CMOs at a score of different companies within my own Slack instance, and I'm asking them questions all the time. I'm like, hey, we're launching this ABM effort. Like, what do you have for me? Influence is happening in these networks. If you look at LinkedIn, LinkedIn has really leaned into publishing and individual employees building up their own platforms. There's all sorts of communities that are rising up. And so it's messy right now, but new channels are always messy in the beginning. I think we're trying to make a bet about how can we activate our own employees in a way that's on message and on brand? How can we leverage the connections that exist within our company and across our company? And how can we use that to create like this new burgeoning channel for us if organic is going down?
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even think about leveraging employees the same way, because I guess I always feel like, ooh, that's like their personal channels and their personal brands. But you're right, like that's the way to spread on many of these platforms. And so yeah, if you can crack that formula, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll opt in. Like you need to make it so that the message that you're sending is something they're excited to share, right? Yeah. And so, again, we'll start with hey, here's a topic. Here's our point of view on this topic. If you want to share, like we've uploaded it into Jasper. If you want to share it, you can call up Jasper on your LinkedIn pages and write about it and be accurate, right? So we've started to do more and more of that.
Yeah. Cool. I guess someone asked in comments, I'm just keeping tabs on it, but like Caitlin's asking, we've also noticed from SEO research that there's less demand for our line of work than previous years. And so what are some unique ways to reach new customers? I know that this is not the Q&A round, but you kind of already went into like activating communities. So I just thought I would pull that thread a bit more. And there's also a very big question, Caitlin. This is like a whole webinar in itself. But yeah, any like zippy, like new age things that you've unlocked?
From a channel standpoint, you said?
Channel, yeah, really anything. Like it could be like a playbook or, a channel perhaps.
We're seeing, it's interesting. Like we're seeing, don't laugh at me when I say this. We're seeing even for like our marketing audience, like TikTok is becoming a search engine. Again, it goes back to this, like, think about this. Over the next couple of years, there's going to be just a massive uprising of content out there. Tons of information. Content's going to become a commodity. Yeah. And so when content becomes a commodity, personality and, trustworthy people and true expertise, that becomes more rare, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's talking, but who's the one that like you actually trust? And so I do see like a pull towards formats where you hear from people like this, right? And where it's not just sort of a 101 on a topic that's devoid of any kind of personality or
Yeah. I think
did
she
before when it was everything, but even within our business audience. And I think the same is true for YouTube and other kind of video-based formats. And I don't think you need a huge, expensive video operation to do that. I think people like the raw, talk to your phone kind of approach.
Yeah, such a good point. Yeah, so anyone that's got all their eggs in the SEO basket, diversify right away. Should have done it last year.
One of the big new search vehicles is Perspectives. Have you guys seen Perspectives
Yeah.
pop up? So
Yeah.
it for those who haven't, it pulls into the Google search results. It pulls in TikToks and Reddit forums and, YouTube videos, because they're trying to counteract, they're going to move to a place where AI is the first response for many searches, but AI has a known, inaccuracy and trust issue. And so they're going to try to flank that with authority, perspectives, like people that you can trust through that vehicle. And I think that's an opportunity.
Yeah, man, those consumer companies that invest a lot in brand marketing, man, they had it right, because like they're so ahead of the curve now.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Tara? What's planned for the rest of the year?
I mean, well, one, I want to keep having this conversation for another hour. So don't worry, we will all be BFFs. So this will continue on. It's actually really similar. I'd say, I'm going to start with the community piece because we're kind of building off of that and then jump into content. But content and community are really the two areas that we're really leaning into, coupling with some of what we talked about earlier. From a community perspective, if we kind of go to the next one, there's something I think that Megan said that really resonated with me too. There are a lot of Slack groups out there, but I do want to be cautious in that when we build community, it isn't just about building a tool. It isn't just about, if you build it, they will come. It's about generating value and finding ways that you can do things like this and then leverage things like your Slack groups and Slack Connect, like those CMO groups, like also in those. And they have been so incredibly valuable to thinking about things that, sometimes you aren't able to do on your own. This community is so valuable to be able to ask the questions and dig in together.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a question that like, what are some of the ways that you can do that? And so our community, just brought on a new community leader. He is amazing. And has been looking at how to build community from discovery to advocacy, which gets into the different kinds of communities that you're creating. And so for us, when we're thinking about everything on the discovery side or the acquisition side or driving community in for people looking to connect, that's really go where they are. You're not your own hosted forum, but it's places that people are communicating or connecting with each other, like TikTok, like Reddit, like other systems, like Slack groups, and being a part of the conversation, finding ways that you can also engage on social, finding ways that you can create your own hosted forums that continue to build on that and bring value. As you think about that on the advocacy side, it's how do you bring your customers together to create more, whether it's one-to-many education, whether it's starting to create better advocacy programs or even customer advisory boards, really great ways to build connections so that you can learn. Like you said, Amrita, we're all in marketing, but we all want to learn from each other in marketing. And that's something so valuable. I find even being on these panels, I'm learning every time Megan and Amrita open your mouth. So that's an amazing thing to be a part of. And so it's really leaning into those and thinking about how you can do that from your own community perspective. Coupling that, content is the other area that we're building. And I think those, for us, they do really go hand in hand. Our senior director of community and senior director of content work together to build out our thought leadership content strategy that aligns with our community efforts. Because what we're really looking to do is educate, empower, and inspire, create content that aligns to the areas that our customers and our audiences are trying to learn, whether that's educating them on, not just the product, but the value that you can bring and why we're doing this in the first place, empowering with things like user stories or inspiring with the different ways that you can be motivated. Those are really the pillars that we think about when we think about our content strategy and then how to leverage the community to really compound that. And so I loved the connection to how do you use your own team members or your own employees to then advocate with your content as well. And then also, how do you leverage your customers to help continue to tell your story? Because virality really happens when you create great moments of value. And so, or great conversations for other reasons, but hopefully all good ones. But as a whole, those are the areas. And so I mentioned in 1H, we talked a lot about our brand campaign, and what drove the success for that was the content that we were creating. It was the 30% higher time on page we were seeing through creating videos, through creating customer stories, through leveraging our customers to also tell their story with us, and starting to build that out into community forums. And how do you create pillar content that also aligns to compounding with those integrated campaigns that Megan kind of talked about? We leverage a lot of our top pillar content or top campaigns as ways that are integrated across the entirety of our marketing channels. And then couple that with pillar content. And so if we go to the next one, we launched a pillar content piece in the first half of the year, which was an ungated QR codes trends report. And that drove 724% higher year-on-year traffic by leveraging actually our communities and helping them compound, again, the actual content itself that we were creating, and using our own product, not just to say, hey, here's how you should use QR codes, but here's how the world is using QR codes. And here's some really cool ways that we're seeing people start to use these in the industry and in multiple different industries, because we have so many different use cases. So when we think about content, we think about it from the lens of community as well, and vice versa. And then also think about not just creating content for the sake of it, but as Megan and Amrita both mentioned, we have to be careful that we're not just following the age-old SEO model. You want to create content that is going to bring value. And that is really what we're starting to see pick up more and more traction.
Yeah.
Nice. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Can I ask, like at Bitly, like, did you have to do a lot of changing of minds on this content side?
What's really interesting is we actually didn't have a robust content strategy prior to really building out a lot of the changes that we've been working on within the team. Bitly has grown a lot because we're such a well-known product, and that's been amazing. And we, a big part of our acquisition funnel is how much we have from our non-paid and our direct and Bitly branded search traffic that comes in. And so some of it is aligned to what we're seeing in the market that we just have to do more from a content perspective. And then I'd say, I've been very lucky. I've got an incredible team to work alongside. People are really excited about doing more content and starting to get it out there and build out the brand a lot more.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Cool. I'll just show one quick thing that Superside is planning for H2. This is not by any means like a thing that people haven't done before, but it was definitely new to us. Like, just talking about newness, I think we just grew so fast on the backs of like a few key playbooks and like a few key channels that we never really thought, oh, wait a second, we can actually run a multi-channel integrated campaign that has all these like bells and whistles and all of this like stuff for like this one singular audience. So we're actually attempting that for the first time. I don't work there anymore, but they are attempting that for the first time in September and October, actually. So what the team did is they picked an audience that is like a very strong fit for us. So we've said, hey, a lot of our customers are tech and SaaS companies, and by the nature of their industry, a lot of them happen to be in California. And on top of that, there's like this big event that happens in September every year. It's called SaaStr. Everyone knows in tech that especially like startup and SMBs, like there's a ton of them that go to SaaStr. And so we said, hey, why don't we take that opportunity to not only reach our existing audience, but also like branch out and clarify what our value props are to people that might already know us. Because we actually ran the survey where a ton of people are like, oh yeah, I've heard of Superside, but they didn't know exactly what we did. And even if they kind of knew what we did, they didn't know what the differences were and how what we provide is a paradigm shift and we're not an agency and all this stuff. So we were like, let's clarify this for our known audience already. So this California campaign, as we call it, is like very like geo-fenced sort of to California. And it is both an inbound and ABM campaign, if you think about it. So the goal is really like brand awareness, but like also the affinity piece, communicating our differentiators, and then of course in the end pipeline creation. And so we've said, hey, we're going to attend SaaStr, this big tech conference. We're going to host a VIP brunch, with a couple of partners. And we're going to do our always on, usual ads, but of course with creative that belongs in this campaign, some of which you can see here. So our always on, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn ads. We're going to actually do billboards for the first time in a very strategic location. So anyone going to the SaaStr conference, if they happen to be driving, they will see it. Anyone landing at the airport going to the SaaStr conference will see it. So airport ads. And then we're also doing like car decals, like these wraps around these cars around the conference. So if you're at this conference, you will see Superside. That's the whole point of this. And then hopefully there's some curiosity and they're like, what is the Superside thing? So how we're going to measure that is to say, do our branded search and direct search go up within that month and those 2 months, and especially over the course of those two or 3 days. And then of course, there's a whole ABM play around this. So our BDR team, we've got humans on this. They're going to actually enact a direct mail campaign, of course, with email, LinkedIn, and all of that stuff, and then branded gift boxes to some of our, what we call named accounts that are showing intent already. So I think the beauty of this campaign is we're kind of going broader than we normally do. So by virtue of that, it tends to be less efficient, which is not the Superside way. We run extremely high efficiency campaigns. So this will definitely not be that efficient, but it's got this like multiple purposes, brand awareness, but also pipeline generation. And it's the first time we're doing it. So that's a big bet for us, and we'll see what happens. And our, time horizon to measure its success is about 6 months. So by the end of the year, we should know, how it did. And if it did well, then we'll just repeat this play in 2024. So yeah, just wanted to show that example as well.
That's exciting. I'll be at SaaStr, so I can't wait to look for all the ads.
Yeah, take photos and send me.
I will.
Awesome. Miles is back on. So I think you're probably like, let's wrap this up. Let's take questions.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're hitting the edge of time. If there is time for maybe a couple questions, that could be pretty good. I think the one that's, again, pretty high level, but I think there's like a lot of conversations about the different types of bets you could be making, and frankly, a lot of ideas. I imagine a lot of companies have like endless lists that they brainstorms. When you think about these bets, how many are you thinking? Like, is there this debate about focus on like, let's make one smart bet this quarter, this year, or is it about 10, 15 kind of experimental bets? I guess I'm curious how you think about it when you're trying to, again, make a bet on growth, but also just maximizing learning. Like, how are we actually increasing the opportunities for us to know what works moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go first quickly. I think, Miles, this because we talk about this all the time, is, it depends on the risk appetite of the company and how much cash you have in the bank. And so if you have high risk tolerance, then you can actually spread that quite a bit and say, hey, we're going to do these like 2 or 3 future yield risky things and see how it goes. You can afford to throw stuff at the wall. If you have extremely low risk appetite, I would suggest you still experiment heavily, but in existing programs, stuff that's kind of already working, but you're experimenting to hopefully make them better, right? And then there's always like the in-betweens. There's always like some stuff that you want to like remain nimble and opportunistic on. And this was also something that, Miles put in place. And we have other leaders on the team at Superside where we're like, there's this like opportunistic bucket of effort and money that we're just going to like park aside. It's not even assigned in our budget. It's kind of like blah. And if the right opportunity arises, we're ready to move on that. So there's always this like floater bucket, I call it, like TBD, that you can park aside. But again, it kind of depends on the DNA of your org and how your finance team thinks about it and how your founders think about it.
For us, I agree with that. And I do think it really depends on the appetite and where you're at as a business and what your focus needs to be. I mean, usually in general, we start with our company OKRs. And what are the things that we know that we need to prioritize? What are the goals of the business? Does one of the bets align to those OKRs? But even when those are established, we follow generally the rule of 3, which is no matter what, there should never be more than 3 big ideas per quarter. And 3 often is even too many. And so I think it depends also on the size of the bet. Some of the stuff we showed, like that life cycle campaign, for example, it was an email. We did that in a day. That was very easy to get out. And so while it wasn't a big bet, it had a pretty big outcome that we can then start to replicate. And so that room for experimentation is just ongoing. That's part of your ongoing growth experimentation as a whole. And you need to be able to take those bets and do them in little small size chunks and then iterate. But the big bets, like our possibilities campaign, that was one. And that was something that we had the entire team kind of really laddering around. And so while we have our OKRs and we set our annual plan, every quarter we come back to that annual plan and we say, okay, here's our goals. Did we hit them? If we did, great. What did we do? If we didn't, what did we learn? Do we still have the right initiatives in place going into the next quarter? And that's when we'll kind of debate together as a team. What are we doing from a product? How do we elevate that from a marketing perspective? And what are we all aligning around going all in on? And I would say things like launches, like we only really have one big, what we call our tier 1 launches a quarter, just to make sure that we've got enough energy, time, focus, and that we can do it right. And the last thing I would say is every bet has a goal. And if you don't know what the goal is and you don't know what you're going to do, we set what we call a learning goal. And that way we go into it with here's what we're hoping that we can achieve. And if we get it, great, let's do more. If we didn't, that's also okay. What did we learn? Making sure, of course, that we're being efficient with our dollars, but there should always be something you're anchoring on.
Yeah, that's great.
Perfect. Yeah, maybe a final one, just because there's a lot of questions and discussion about research, which going back to that subject, I think that you first introduced. So specifically, Astawa is asking, how do you build a research process to ensure your ICP is accurate to who could really benefit from your products? And I think for what resonates with me in that question is like building that ongoing process, because I think it's the type of thing that a team will do once. You feel it's like, finally, we nailed our ICP, we know our personas, and then 2 years later, that's all out of date and the world's fundamentally different. So how do you kind of keep that as a up-to-date representation of an accurate ICP, but then really building that process in something that, as Amrita mentioned, might be not the sexiest part of a marketer's day-to-day job?
Yeah, I mean, I could start off here. I think that I'll just be candid. I think your ability to turn it into a process will depend a lot on your resources on the team. If you have a dedicated UX team, if you've got dedicated people for research, you're going to have much better odds of doing that. If you're doing it as a tack on to existing roles, which I'm not knocking, like sometimes you have to do that as a company. You're just not there yet where you can have those kind of research focused roles. Then I think it's like, okay, you can't have it be an always on process. How do you make sure that it is an always included part of projects that are those big bets, as Tara was saying, your quarterly launches, your major pushes that you have out into the field. So I think there's kind of two bit different paths there. For the always on research, if you've got the team, I think that, depending on your audience, their influences, their perspectives are going to evolve fairly frequently as the world around them changes. So I think once you have that really strong foundation of who is it, what's their pain point, where do they get information, I would make the process around, hey, it's 2 quarters later. The world's different today. There are new threats. There are new opportunities. How are those threats and opportunities affecting that audience? And ask them about that and how their world is changing. To me, it's like the emphasis should be on change and shifts in that audience as sort of a recurring thing.
Yeah, and I love that. And Megan's exactly right. Like if you don't have the internal team that has experience or knows how to do this, highly encourage bring on an outsourced resource if you have the budget to do it, which is what we did. I mean, as we were building up and hiring some of our team, we worked with consultants, we worked with partners to kind of do a lot of the research we were working on, and then, have hired for some of the team members for that to be a part of their remit that have done that before. And I think part of it is, when you know your ICP or your ideal customer profile from a demographics perspective, or like, here's the type of company we want to work with, that's when you match that with what we're talking about with the quantitative and the qualitative. To what Megan was saying, surveying your customers and doing it on an ongoing basis and leveraging frameworks for that is really, really important. And I would say not just surveying them, but take a scientific approach to how you parse the research that comes back through. And so whenever we send out a survey and we'll ask very specific questions, we leverage jobs to be done. Other people can leverage different frameworks for personas, but a lot of the questions are the same in trying to understand what was going on in your life before you signed up. What are the things you're looking for? And go through and find the patterns when you parse that. And the patterns are what helps you get to those pain points that are consistent across the board. And we found, for example, we had some theories on who we thought our customer jobs were. And we came back with 4 jobs, only one of which was a job that we absolutely knew. And so we learn a lot through the customer research. And then I would say, if you're evolving and as quickly as you're evolving and as quickly as the world is evolving, consistently do this, every 6 months or so to check back in and make sure that you're continuing to learn your customer insights.